This custom helmet sticker might look like a small, harmless way for a player to show some personality, but the NHL doesn't see it that way, and just ask Patrice Bergeron, who learned this the hard way. He added a tiny tribute sticker on the back of his helmet, something most fans wouldn't even notice, but the league shut it down instantly. What looked harmless ended up getting him warned by officials and threatened with a fine if he wore it again. The NHL made it clear that even the smallest detail, no matter how meaningful it is to the player, has to follow their strict rulebook, or it's gone. It started with something so small, most fans wouldn't have noticed if cameras didn't zoom in. A handful of NHL players had started using tiny details on their gear to show personality or support for causes. A bit of colored tape here, a subtle design there. Nothing flashy, nothing wild, just simple symbols that blended with their team colors. Fans who caught a glimpse of these details online thought they looked clean, classy, and exactly the kind of quiet personality hockey players are known for. Social media lit up with comments like, "More NHL players should do this," and "This looks awesome." For once, it felt like the league might finally be letting players add a little style without causing a problem. But the NHL had other plans. Over the last few seasons, the league quietly tightened its grip on what is and isn't allowed on player equipment, especially when it came to visible messages, colors, or symbols that weren't part of the standard uniform. It didn't matter that some changes were tiny. It didn't matter that they weren't sponsor logos. It didn't matter that most fans thought they were harmless. If it wasn't specifically approved, it was suddenly a problem. When word spread that certain types of tape and gear decorations were being restricted, a lot of fans felt like the league was being dramatic over things no one in the stands would ever complain about. But the NHL didn't care. A rule was a rule, even if it made no sense to anyone watching. For a moment, it felt like the league had gone overboard. But what happened next proved they were only warming up. Because just a short time later, the NHL's approach to player expression exploded into a full-blown controversy. And the league's reaction was even harsher. The most visible flashpoint came when the NHL moved to ban rainbow-colored pride tape, a small strip of tape players have been using for years to show support for LGBTQ+ inclusion. It was a tiny accessory on a stick. It didn't change how anyone played, it didn't hurt anyone. But now, suddenly, it was on the wrong side of the rulebook. Fans loved pride tape from the beginning. Pictures spread across social media every time a player wrapped their stick in bright colors. People commented on how sharp it looked, how it added flair to an otherwise plain stick, and how it made players stand out in a positive way. Kids even started asking local stores if they could buy similar tape to match their favorite players. But when the league's ban became public, the reaction was immediate, and it wasn't quiet. The NHL saw the photos too, and they weren't smiling. Once the ban was announced, players who wanted to keep using the tape were told it was no longer allowed in games. A few said they would respect the rule, even if they didn't agree with it. Others hinted they'd find ways around it. One player, Travis Dermott, went even further and simply used the tape anyway, wrapping his stick in rainbow colors during a game to make a point. Cameras caught it, fans noticed it, and suddenly, the league's crackdown was at the center of the hockey world. That's when things got embarrassing. The situation turned into a public fight over something that, on the surface, seemed small, a strip of colored tape. Commentators and fans questioned why the NHL was spending its energy policing tape instead of focusing on bigger issues. Former executives and players openly criticized the decision, calling it a step backward for a league that had spent years saying, "Hockey is for everyone." The more the league dug in, the worse the backlash looked, and the shock didn't stop there. As the noise grew, it became clear this wasn't just about one rule or one accessory. Fans pointed out how other leagues allowed shoes, sleeves, and gear with far more personality and color. They asked why the NHL seemed determined to shut down almost anything that made players look unique. Even neutral fans, people who didn't care about any specific team, started commenting that the league was acting like a strict school principal instead of a modern sports organization. And here's where the real shock hit. Because after enough players and fans pushed back, the NHL was forced into a rare reversal. The league quietly updated its stance and allowed pride tape again, effectively admitting the crackdown had gone too far. It was a win for player expression, but it also sent a clear message. When players push the boundaries of the rulebook, even with something as small as tape, the league is always watching, and it won't hesitate to step in. Fans couldn't believe how far things had gone over something so minor. Commentators couldn't believe it took public defiance to change the league's mind. Even people outside hockey were talking about how a few inches of colored tape had exposed just how strict the NHL had become over the smallest details. And if players thought the crackdown on gear and accessories was over, they were wrong. Because just when everyone thought the league couldn't go any further, new rule tweaks showed that equipment and appearance would keep getting tighter, from how theme nights are handled to what counts as acceptable on-ice gear. And that wasn't the only time the league went too far. The NHL has always talked about supporting players, supporting causes, and supporting the community. But when the Pride Tape ban hit, that message suddenly felt hollow. Behind the scenes, players weren't just annoyed, they were confused. Some had used the tape quietly for years without a single complaint. Trainers, equipment managers, even coaches knew it was harmless. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't advertising, it wasn't political. It was just a message of inclusion taped onto a stick. But the moment the memo dropped, the atmosphere around the league changed. Players described it feeling like the NHL had shut the door on them, not because of what the tape looked like, but because of what it represented. Many of them had teammates, family members, or close friends in the LGBTQ+ community. For them, Pride Tape wasn't a stunt, it was personal. And yet, overnight, something that had always been welcome was suddenly forbidden. Some guys in the locker room tried to laugh it off, acting like it didn't bother them. Others privately admitted they felt like they were being treated like children, like they couldn't be trusted to use their own judgment. Even team staff said the rule felt unnecessary, especially when the league had proudly promoted the tape during previous seasons. But all that frustration suddenly turned to shock and an admiration when Travis Dermott took the ice. His choice wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even obvious unless you were really looking, but the meaning behind it was huge. The moment those few inches of rainbow tape appeared on his stick, everyone in the league knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't defiance for attention, it was a reminder of everything the league had said it stood for, and suddenly didn't. Inside NHL offices, the move didn't go unnoticed. Cameras caught it. Social media exploded. Analysts questioned what the league was trying so hard to prevent. Even players on other teams quietly told reporters they respected Dermott for doing something they didn't feel brave enough to try themselves. And the league's response, or lack of one, spoke volumes. Instead of shutting him down immediately, the NHL found itself trapped. Punish him, and they look heartless. Ignore it, and the ban looks pointless. Either way, the league couldn't win. Pressure built fast. Fans criticized the decision nonstop. Media outlets called the ban embarrassing, unnecessary, and self-inflicted. Even longtime supporters of the league said it made hockey look outdated, out of touch, and overly controlling. The controversy stopped being about tape. It became a question of what the NHL really believed. And eventually, the league folded. They reversed the rule quietly, but the damage was already done. Players now knew just how fragile their personal expression was. They understood that even the smallest symbol, something that hurt no one and inspired thousands, could be taken away without warning. And the scary part was realizing that if the league was willing to crack down on something this small, there might not be a limit to what they'd police next. When it comes to brands and logos, the NHL might be one of the strictest leagues in all of sports. They don't just control what players wear on the outside, they control almost every stitch, strap, and sticker that comes near the ice. The league signs big sponsorship deals, sets equipment standards, and then expects everything players use in games to fit inside those rules. Even the smallest details, from helmet decals to jersey patches, are tracked and approved long before anyone steps onto the ice. Most fans don't see that side of the sport, but the players live with it every single night. That control goes way beyond the obvious logos you see on jerseys and helmets. Sticks, gloves, pads, pants, socks, helmets. Almost every visible piece of gear has guidelines about the brands allowed, the colors used, and where marks can appear. If a brand isn't part of the league's ecosystem, it doesn't get on TV. And if a player shows up with something that doesn't match those rules, they get pulled aside quietly and told to switch it out before they ever touch the puck. It doesn't matter if the gear is safe, it doesn't matter if no logo is visible. If the brand or design isn't approved, that's enough. Fans rarely see these conversations. Players usually just switch gear and move on. But every once in a while, stories leak out about how strict things can get, about players being told to cover a logo, change a stick, or swap out a piece of equipment because it didn't match what the league wanted on camera. That's when fans start asking the same questions. Why does it matter what socks or tape a player uses if no one can even see the brand? Why does the league care so much about something so small? The answer is simple. Every brand on the ice has to fit the business and image the NHL is protecting. And this is where things really start to shock people. Because once fans begin paying attention to NHL equipment rules, they start noticing how strange, tiny, and petty some restrictions can feel. Goalie pads must follow specific color and size rules. Sticks can't be wrapped or altered in ways that hide certain marks. Even the way logos appear on practice gear, warm-up jerseys, and helmets is controlled by agreements and guidelines behind the scenes. These aren't one-off moments. They're part of how the league runs things, quietly, constantly, in the background of every game. But there is one equipment rule that most people actually understand, because as strict as the NHL can be, there is one accessory rule that does make sense. The rule about dark-tinted visors. Years ago, Players experimented with darker tints to look cool or block bright arena lights. But trainers and medical staff raised concerns. If a player took a big hit and wasn't moving, they needed to read the player's eyes immediately. Pupil reactions can help show if a player is concussed or even unconscious. With dark visors, trainers couldn't see anything. Seconds matter in those moments. So the NHL cracked down. Dark tints were basically taken off the table, and only clear or lightly tinted visors were allowed. The rule has quietly changed how players approach their look. Plenty of skaters would love to wear darker visors in games. They look sharp. They cut glare. They make players feel like they're in full battle mode. Fans react instantly whenever a player uses a slightly darker visor in warm-ups or photo shoots. Social media blows up with comments about how intimidating it looks. But when it comes time for real game action, that same visor has to come off or be toned down, because safety wins over style in the rulebook. And still, when you look at the full picture, restricted logos, controlled patches, limited tape options, and rules even on how clear a visor needs to be, it becomes obvious how tight the NHL's grip really is. The league watches every inch of player gear like a hawk. No detail is too small, no accessories too harmless. Every strap, every mark, every visible brand has to fit into the league's idea of what belongs on the ice. And that's why the NHL has some of the strictest accessory rules in sports. The NHL might be one of the greatest leagues in the world, but when it comes to accessories, gear, and anything players wear on the ice, their rulebook is one of the strictest on the planet. From banned stickers, to blocked tributes, to fines over tiny logos no one even sees, the league leaves almost no room for personality or expression. And whether you agree with the NHL's control or think they've gone way too far, one thing is clear: these stories are only a small look at how deep the rules really go. Because behind every game, every shift, and every piece of equipment, the league is watching. If you want more wild NHL stories, make sure to check out the next video. Trust me, you won't believe what players got fined for next.